What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The Celestial Compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
Greetings, Earthlings. Welcome to Celestial Compass. We're kicking off the month of June with a topic that is actually appropriate for the general vibe of the month. This is a month of chattiness, lots of chatter, loud talk, minds running all over the place, and getting to the bottom of a lot of situation, huge amounts of information, revelations, information coming to the fore that's been it's been dug up from our psyches, from the back rooms. We will see the results of all kinds of investigation that's been going on slightly outside the line of our sight, and then talking and running around, and as we get toward the middle of the month, wanting to be with a lot of people and sharing ideas and figuring out what we want to do with all this. Should be very, very active, very, very social. And if you want to learn more about this, my forecasts are at Times. I have my forecast for the month is there. My mooncasts will be there as well, and they are also cross-posted at my site, empowermentunlimited.net. So for the start of the month, we're going to talk about something that not a lot of people know about, and it is fascinating. It will give you all kinds of new textures for how you can think about your chart and astrology, and that is asteroids. And I have as my guest Alex Miller, who runs a site that is dedicated to asteroid astrology, particularly asteroids in the news. He is a professional writer and astrologer, author of The Black Hole book, which details deep space points in astrological interpretation, and also author of the forthcoming Heaven on Earth, a comprehensive study of asteroids, both mythic and personal. Alex is a frequent contributor to the Mountain Astrologer, Daykeeper Journal, and NCR's Journals and E-News Commentary. His work has also appeared in Aspects Magazine, Dell Horoscope, Planet Waves, Neptune Cafe, and Sastrology. He is a past president of the Philadelphia Astrological Society and a former board member of the Philadelphia chapter of NCGR. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. This is something, as we were chatting earlier, I know just a teeny tiny drop about, and I find what I see on your site regularly to be so fascinating. And what I'd like to start with is, how did you come to astrology? How did you discover it and decide that was something you wanted to learn about?
You know, astrology was something that always fascinated me, even as a child. I would beg my mother for those little scrolls you used to find in the checkout lines, about Leo, which was my sign, and she would begrudgingly buy one for me on occasion. And it was always very interesting to me. And as I got older, I began to look into more about relationship compatibility type things.
Eclipse
but
on May 15th,
there was always a kind of a snag there for me, because it would be written in the form of Leo man with Capricorn woman, or
chapter.
Pisces woman with Virgo man. And as a gay man, the pronouns didn't quite jive for me, and I wasn't sure which to look up. Do I look up the Leo man or the Leo woman, or, And then when I was into my later 20s, I was getting into a sort of metaphysical period in general, reading a lot of metaphysics overall, and I came across a book called Gay Signs. And that was written with the right jargon from my perspective, and it really allowed me to kind of get more deeply into the thing and to realize there was a good connection here.
I remember that book.
Yes. I also encountered a local Philadelphia astrology group at the time, Philadelphia Astrological Society, and so I began to form more of a social context and get into more education. And within a few years, I was writing and doing readings myself. That was back in the 80s.
In the 80s, yeah, I think we were floating around. Our genesis is kind of parallel. How did you start working with asteroids? How did they catch your attention?
Well, one of the local astrologers, Jacob Schwartz in Philadelphia, was very into them from a very early stage. He was a pioneer in the field, and his work always intrigued me. But it was kind of, even though the internet was there, it wasn't really fully accessible in the same way that it is today. And it was hard to get data on things like this. I did pick up Demetra George's Asteroid Goddesses book, which deals with the first 4 discovered. And I found that interesting, but it didn't have a lot of mythic depth in those particular stories, or I should say mythic range. They kind of had similar issues. But in the back of that book, there was a section that just briefly dealt with quite a number of other named points. And as I began to put those into my chart, that's where I really began my studies. Again, that probably would have been mid-90s at this point. And then as I got more involved online and the access you can get to information there, I would be scrolling down these lists of asteroids, and I would come across, regular people names and stuff. And, I found my own names listed there and plugged those into my chart and was really fascinated by what I found.
So probably we should define our terms at the outset. What is an asteroid?
So asteroids are minor bodies in the sense that they're small in size. They've got a lot of heft in the chart if they apply to the individual and how they're placed. But true asteroids appear in a belt of space that lies between Mars and Jupiter. That's where the vast majority of these bodies will be found. There are some others that travel within Jupiter's orbit. There is a cluster of them that travels about 60 degrees ahead of the planet Jupiter, and another cluster that travels 60 behind. And by astronomical convention, they have been named for characters from the Iliad. So I forget which group is before and which is behind, but one of the groups is named for Greeks in that struggle, and one of the groups is named for Trojans. In addition, I use other minor bodies of the system. There are centaurs, like Chiron, which most people maybe have heard of. There are several others in that class, and they have variant orbits that kind of bridge planetary orbital patterns. They can come in as close as almost to Jupiter and as far out as Neptune. And then beyond Neptune, there's things called trans-Neptunians, by which I don't mean the Uranian hypothetical planets. That's an actual astronomical designation as well. Anything past Neptune in a certain region is called trans-Neptunians, and some of those are dwarf planets as well, like Pluto, which was demoted in 2006 from planetary status to dwarf. And then beyond that, there's another region called SDOs, scattered disk objects, and that would be including things like Sedna, which is one of the furthest bodies we're aware of. That has like a 10,000-year orbit, so that's really far out there. But I use all of these points in a chart interpretation, as they apply.
And it just adds a depth to the information.
Yeah, you can really refine things, particularly with. There are 2 basic categories. There's MNAs, which are mythic named asteroids. Those have a mythic backstory that you can begin an interpretation from. They're predominantly Greek or Roman, but there are also asteroids there named from the Egyptian pantheons, some Middle Eastern myths, some Asian, some Mesoamerican, and those kind of, in a sense, are prepackaged, and they have like a planet energy. They're more themed. You look at the myth and you say, okay, what's the theme of this myth, and then you apply that to the chart. PNAs, which are personal named asteroids, are points that are actually named for people, places, or things. And they obviously have a much more narrow range of interpretation, but they can really get granular in the chart and become extremely specific. let me give you a quick example from my own chart, which is how I started.
Okay.
So my birth name is Kevin Miller, all right? And when I came out at 17, I changed, not legally, but I took the name Alexander, which is usually written as Alex, and I've used that ever since, and most people know me that way. But when I put those, there are matches for all those, and when I put them into the chart, asteroid Kevin comes up within a few degrees of the sun, which makes sense. That's my identity, my individuality is the sun, and being in the transit sky with the sun at the time of my birth, it was a logical choice for my parents because it was kind of out there in the zeitgeist, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And you will most commonly find in any individual chart that the asteroids that apply to the owner of the chart will typically, not always, but typically will appear in connection either with the sun, moon, ascendant, or Mercury, which represents the naming function. And then we have asteroid Miller, my surname, that opposes my moon, which again makes sense because the moon is ancestral inheritance, of which the surname is the chief exemplar, right? You get that automatically. You don't have a choice in that, so to speak. As your parents choose your name, they're kind of locked into your surname. And like I said, when I came out at 17, I changed my name to Alexander, and I found later, much later, that there's an Alexandra asteroid, which you can always interchange genders, that the cosmos is very forgiving about that sort of thing. You won't always, like, there's no Philip asteroid, but there's a Philippa. There's no Louis, but there's a Louisa. You can use those interchangeably. And actually, asteroid Alexandra appears exactly on my ascendant, which defines how we want to present ourselves to others, right? So when I came out in that identity, I chose an asteroid unwittingly at the time. I wasn't aware of any depth to astrology. I certainly wasn't aware of asteroids. That falls exactly on my ascendant, and it's also exactly squared my sun, which shows a very strong connection, stronger than the 4-degree orb of Kevin to the sun, and that's my comfort zone, in other words.
There is no such thing as coincidence. I love this. Okay, so can we go back to the mythic named asteroids briefly? Sure. I know that if people come to your website and they sign up for your mailing list, they get a download that explains several mythic named asteroids. And one that I think would be very easy for people to identify with is Achilles.
Okay.
Because of what it represents.
Sure. So Achilles has a range of meanings, as most mythic points do. What you do is you analyze the myth and see what the themes are that emerge, and then you can apply those. On a very basic level, Achilles does refer to like military prowess. You'll see it prominent in the charts of a lot of generals or people who are famous in military spheres. And it's bravery and it's athletic prowess. But there are a lot of other nuances to Achilles' story, and one of them has to do with what we term now as the Achilles heel, which is a point of weakness or vulnerability that is inherent and causes potentially causes the destruction or the downgrading on some level of the individual. Achilles was the child of a demigoddess and a mortal, and in order to give him immortality, his mother dipped him at birth into the river Styx, but she had to hold on to him. She held on to him by the heel, and that part was never submerged, so that was his one vulnerable spot. And ultimately, he was shot there by Hector and was killed in that manner. So it represents any weakness or vulnerability that can potentially undermine our efforts.
So if it is closely aspected to the sun, the moon, your ascendant, that would be something that would be very important to understand, it seems to me.
Yes, actually, if it's aspected to any point, because if it's aspected to Venus, then your vulnerability comes through finances or interpersonal relationships or your value system. If it's aspected to Jupiter, your vulnerability might be in education or in your social interchange. So it doesn't really matter. In the case of P&As of the owner, that's important as to where they fall as to their potential. But for anything else, you can make an interpretation from aspects to any planetary energy from any asteroid.
So that was one that just jumped out at me. I'm wondering if there are any MNAs that particularly appeal to you or that you automatically, like, do you have go-tos? Like, I'm going to start with this,
Yeah,
fill in the blank.
it depends. If it's there are so many. Okay, so there are an estimated 1.9 million such bodies in the solar system. We have discovered about 500,000 of them at this point and computed their orbits, and about 29,000 are named. So there are a lot of options out there. You can't put everything into a chart, obviously, even though everybody has everything in their chart. But I will tailor the points that I focus on to the story. So if there's a lot of evidence of recklessness or rashness or an inability to follow good advice, I'll look at Icarus. Mm-hmm. If there's a real sense of cosmic vengeance or someone out for retribution or someone who particularly self-undoing efforts, that's Nemesis. If it's a story involving justice or the courts, that's Thamus or Justitia, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Well, this might be a good point for us to take our first break for the show. Everyone, please hang on. We've got lots more to talk about.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for astro-insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking today about asteroids with Alex Miller of Alex's Asteroid Astrology. And just before the break, we were talking about Mythic Named Asteroids. Are there any, well, you were saying that it depends on the story, but if you're looking at a person's chart, do you actually talk to people beforehand to get a sense of which ones, or you just look to see what's making a close aspect?
I usually just go down the list. If you generate a chart at theraneu, they'll give you like 75 or 80 up front that they will just automatically include, and I'll scroll through that first. I actually don't do counseling astrology anymore. I'm mainly into writing and research. If I did, or when I did, yes, I would get some sense from the client of what their issues are, so that would trigger me to know which asteroid mythic themes might be important. And I would then, run those down and see how they were working in the chart.
And just an aside, I was going to ask this later, but since you mentioned it, tell people what theraneu is.
theraneu is a chart generating site, an ephemeris generating site. It's SERENNU, www.theraneu.com, and you can plug in your natal data there, and then there's a link from there to the Minor Planet Center's website, which will give you an alphabetical listing of all 29,000 currently named asteroids, and then you can scroll through that and look for matches for your own name or family names if you want that, or any particular myth that you're aware of that you might be interested in seeing how that could apply to your life. You can find those names there and add their numbers, and they'll give you the skinny on where they are.
And you can use the site's search results sorted by astrological degree, and you can just go through and see.
You can sort by name, you can sort by degree, you can sort by patterns. And I believe astro.com has the same capacity. It's just not one that I use.
Mm-hmm. So how do you work with an asteroid in a chart? Is it pretty much like any other body?
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of controversy over how exact things should be, and I understand that perspective because there are so many. On the other hand, for me, consciousness is consciousness, and once it's in the consciousness, it has the same value as anything else. I mean, if we're gonna start parsing things by size, you can fit like 430 Mercuries into the size of Jupiter, but we don't give Jupiter 430 times the orb, you know. So I use whatever orbs you're comfortable with. I don't vary them for these points. But I will say that most of my work involves, just by the way it pans out, involves points that are very close in orb, you know, 1-2 degrees typically is what you'll see. But I'll extend that as far as I would normally do for a planet, you know, if it feels, if I can see a connection there and what's going on.
Do you use only hard aspects or just the major aspects or what?
I use, you know, traditional Ptolemaic aspects, but I also use phase aspects like semi-square and sesquiquadrates, because just like the phases of the moon, those are important shifts between bodies. You know, when you get to those degrees, those are 45. I guess I said 45 and 135 degree aspects. They're part of the same. They're part of the same class of aspects as squares and oppositions. So I use.
They're uncomfortable. They
Yes.
don't want you to sit still. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So moving on to the research that you do and that you share on your website, you write a lot about people in the news and events in the news, and I'm wondering if there are certain asteroids that you come across a lot. I'm thinking Icarus, maybe.
Yeah. Icarus is a frequent offender here for sure. Yeah. Again, it depends on the nature of the story. I mean, right now. Actually, neither of these are asteroids astronomically, but right now we're going through a conjunction of a TNO called Ixion, which was named for the first murderer in Greek myth, and a centaur body called Pholus, which is associated with multiple deaths by whatever cause. So this is unfortunately an extended conjunction. Their rates of movement right now are very similar. They have come into conjunction, and they will be within 10 degrees of each other for 35 years. It started in 2008. It goes on to like 20... whatever that is, 43, I guess. And during this period, we've seen the rise of the mass shooting. So Ixy and Pholus will show up consistently in the charts of those incidents and also in the charts of the shooters.
Can I just point out that 2008 is when the Supreme Court reinterpreted the Second Amendment, but the focus on the individual's rights instead of the notion of the militia?
I hadn't thought of that, but that certainly was... I mean, it was right
so
on the
that's
nose,
when it started. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, are there ones that you specifically look for? Like, this is my favorite. I went to see. I know it has to be here. Ah, there you are.
No, not per se. Again, it depends on the story, and I deal with so many points. I can't pick a favorite child. I really can't.
All right. And your choice of individuals or stories, is it pretty much just based on whatever is screaming in the news, or do you ever get like a nudge, like this is where I see something going? Or
at this point, there's so much going on. But one thing that does nudge me is if I'm hearing a story. I've been doing this so long. I certainly don't have a complete, mental catalog of all the named points. But I'll go, okay. There's a PNA. There's a PNA. There's a PNA. Let's see what this. Let's look at this story, because I know I have exact matches, which I always like to work with exacts. You can use phonetic matches. You can use similar spellings. You can use the same word in a different language, and you can bring in all that stuff. But the exact matches always show the best, and they're the best for explaining this to people who aren't familiar with it, or who are uncomfortable or uncertain about the concept of their validity. So that does it. And then, anything that's screaming in the headlines, I generally take a look at. And it can be anything, any range of things. I do a lot of things that I do Oscar previews and follow-ups, not earth-shattering stuff necessarily, but, anything that strikes my fancy. And sometimes I'll go back and look at historic incidents. Sometimes I'll look just at, I do a lot of obituaries when people have passed, and I'll talk about how the points functioned during their lives, things like that.
So we were talking before the show started, and you mentioned that you have sort of like a mental catalog of asteroids that are named for celebrities?
Yes. There are quite a number of these, actually. I did an article for Mountain Astrologer a few years ago that actually Astro.com just reprinted, if folks want to go and find that there. I always find that particularly fascinating because... It's one thing to have an asteroid named Alex, and, oh, look, this Alex has it here and this Alex has it there. But it's another thing to find an asteroid named specifically for a person and then see where that falls in their own charts. I have 3 examples I'll give you that not only are pretty stunning, but also fit that rule of sun-moon ascendant connection for asteroids that refer to the owner of the chart.
Okay.
So Robin Williams, right? He has an asteroid named Robin Williams. All is one word, and that's something you'll encounter a lot. Astronomers tend not to use spaces in their designations when they're naming the points that they've discovered. So very often first and last names will be strung together. I call that a CNA, a compound name asteroid. It can be split and used for either first or last name as a marker, and then you just discard the other half that you're not using at that time, because it'll resonate to both portions. But when Robin Williams was born, there was this tiny little chunk of space debris that was sitting right on his ascendant. No one had discovered it yet. It wasn't discovered for decades. He wasn't discovered. He was just born. He wasn't famous. He didn't have famous parents. 45 years after his birth, this point was named for him, and it falls exactly on his ascendant at his birth. Okay, now Brad Pitt, the actor, has his own named asteroid, and it falls on his sun. The musician Stevie Wonder has an asteroid named Stevie Wonder, and it falls on his moon. And that sort of synchronicity, you can call it coincidence, whatever you want to call it, is just staggering to me. I mean,
to be clear, each of these individuals was born, later became famous, and after their fame, some outside party named an item in the sky for them, and then that asteroid ended up being contacting their chart really closely.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The best argument I have ever heard for astrology came from a charismatic Episcopalian guy that I knew, who said that he believed that astrology had to make sense because he believed that God ordered the universe that closely. And I gotta say, this kind of coincidence sort of fuels that that belief. Okay.
Now, something else that I always look for in a chart, you were asking about what I do look for, is stationary bodies.
Okay.
Everything in the sky, except for the sun and the moon, makes stations. Just to give a brief explanation for those who aren't familiar, the station it's actually an optical illusion, but it does have genuine power in a chart. Because of the perspective of the 3 bodies, the triangulation between the sun and the Earth and whatever this third body is that you're looking at some point that body in its orbit around the sun will appear to slow down, come to a standstill, and reverse motion for a period, and then resume motion again. Whenever it's at those points, let's say it normally takes 3 days or a week to pass through a degree of the zodiac. It's now going much more slowly, so it might spend what might have been a 3-day passage, if it's a station, might be 3 weeks. So its energies are really imbuing that very strongly, and they become power points in a chart. And astrologers know this as regards planets, but asteroids do the same thing. I'll give you a couple of examples here that I always enjoy hearing or showing up. Former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, he had 2 points of station in his chart. The first one is Justitia. Well, Justitia is named for the Roman goddess of justice and is the derivation of our word justice, which was his job title for the last 30 years of his life. The other point is an asteroid called, that's an MNA, a Mythic Named Asteroid. He also had a PNA station, personal named asteroid, called Shafter. Now, I don't know what Shafter may have meant for the first almost 80 years of his life. Maybe he lived on Shafter Street, or his grandparents did. Maybe he had a best friend in grammar school whose last name was Shafter, or a college girlfriend, or a teacher or mentor that was very important to him with that last name. I don't know about that because I don't know his life story that intimately, but I can tell you this. When he died at a hunting resort lodge in West Texas, it was in the town of Shafter.
That is freaky. I forgot that.
So that point may have waited 80 years to show its power, but it's now going to be in the first line of every biography ever written about him, born such and such a place and time, died such and such a time in Shafter.
And
So,
what contact was it making again?
It's at station. It does happen to be trying his sun, but it wouldn't have to be. It's
I
just
see.
important that it's at station.
It's at stations. Okay, it was trying his sun and stations. Wow.
Now, another one that I look to for this is Martin Luther King Jr. He had 3 points actually at station in his birth chart. Tino Ixion, which you recall is named for the first murderer in Greek myth. Asteroid Requiem, which is named for the funeral mass for the dead and often refers to a memorable death or a memorable commemoration of death. And Asteroid Lorraine. Now, the first two, it's easy to read, right? The man was assassinated and caused quite a furor, and everyone remembers that. And, he's got his own holiday and everything. So what was Lorraine? I mean, it's not his wife's name. It's not his mother's name. Again, was it a girlfriend or something? I don't know. But he happened to be killed while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis.
Yeah, I remember. Oh, that's so freaky.
And Lorraine was also stationary on the day he died, as was Requiem. Now, his killer, James Earl Ray, has a stationary asteroid in his chart, and that would be asteroid Martin Luther.
Okay.
Are you freaked out yet?
Yeah, there are times one of my standing catchphrases is nobody could make this stuff up.
Right. Now I want to give you one more because she's a real standout. If you look at this woman's chart, all you have to do is look at the stationary points, and you've got her whole life story. I'm talking about Lady Diana Spencer, who became the Princess of Wales. In her chart, she has that station, asteroid Diana and asteroid Spencer, her full name. She has asteroid Charlotte, which is the closest to Charles, the name of her husband. She has asteroid Hera, which is named for the Greek goddess of marriage, showing that marriage would be a pivotal influence in her life. She has asteroid King at station, which shows a connection to royalty. She has asteroid Rip at station, which I use as the acronym RIP, rest in peace, another death indicator, meaning she'd have a memorable death and funeral. And asteroid Paris, which is the city in which she died. So if you know nothing else about Diana, all you got to do is look at her stationary points, and there's her whole biography.
Right there.
When she was married, there was exact conjunction of stationary bodies, Aphrodite and Achilles. Aphrodite is affairs outside of marriage, and Achilles is a weakness that threatens to destroy the union.
And Hera was certainly married to someone who may have been royalty, but had lots of affairs.
Yes.
What strikes me as you're saying this isn't Charlotte the name of one of Prince William's daughters? I wonder if there's a connection there. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So there's an abiding link to the further generations of the family.
Yeah.
This is amazing. I'm wondering, I'm sure you haven't looked, if when you look again, I'm curious if there's any connection to Mother Teresa because they died at the same time.
Yeah, I've never looked at that, but there very well may be, yeah.
And her death sort of allowed Mother Teresa to slip out because the news so overshadowed it. Right. Well, that is astonishing. I honestly, I don't often stammer and not know what to say, but that is incredible. So, and you get, again, to get this, a person can go to theraneu and run information and then just go through the search results and see what is showing up within a very close orb to anything in the natal chart or the event chart, I guess.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So this also works for events, of course, right? Because an event can have a chart just like an individual.
Oh, sure. I mostly work with events, at this point, yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we are a little early for the next break, but this is a pretty good place to stop. So I'm hoping that people will come on back because we're going to be talking about asteroids in a specific news item.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
How would you like navigational tools you can use on your own? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and click the shop tab. There you'll find lots of talks and guides explaining the big influences at work now, like Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. You'll also find a variety of guided visualizations for relaxing, clearing your energy, or getting to know planetary archetypes. That address again? empowermentunlimited.net. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking about asteroids today with astrologer Alex Miller. And just before the break, you were talking about asteroids named for celebrities and the role of stationary asteroids in the charts of famous people and how they can sort of give a mini biography simply by looking at them. Do you have any other examples of that, or would you like to move on to an example in the news?
I'll just give you one quick one for Bill Clinton, because again, it's illustrative of how vital this can be, and it's got your friend Achilles in it again. So Bill Clinton in his chart has 4 points at station. 3 of them are clustered together in Sagittarius, and 1 is in Aries. And the Sagittarian points that can join each other and are trine his sun are Achilles, White House, and Salacia.
Oh my God!
Now, Salacia is the root of our word salacious. It refers to titillation and scandal, often of a sexual nature. White House, of course, refers to the Oval Office and the presidency. Achilles is, again, that inherent vulnerability that threatens to undermine us. So right there you see the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal. And then the interesting point is the other point in his chart, which is at station, is asteroid Jones. Now, the genesis of the legal case that formed the underpinning of his impeachment was the lies that he told in a deposition for a private sexual harassment case brought by Paula Jones.
Right.
So you're seeing her influence there as well.
Again, I'm just shaking my head. I really don't have a follow-up question for that.
Well, why don't we look more granularly at a current event story then?
That would be good, yes. And you have one that is still gripping everyone as we're recording this.
Yes. The horrific mass shooting at the Uvalde, Texas grammar school last week. The shooter was Salvador Ramos. He was just 18. He was born on the 16th of May in 2004. When you get into his chart, it's a really I have to work with this sort of thing a lot in what I do, but this is one that really dug deep for me, and it took me quite a while to write it up because it was just kind of devastating. But let's see how far we get. So the principal feature of the chart, and we don't have time, which would help us more, so I can't really talk about the moon or the angles, but we do have the anchor feature of the chart is a solar grand cross. And for those who are not that familiar with that term, it's 4 or more points that are equidistant from each other around the zodiac at roughly 90-degree intervals. Okay, so you've got an opposition from the sun and 2 squares from the sun, and everything squares and opposes each other. So on the solar end, with the sun, we have a TNO called chaos. Mm. So he saw himself, since it's on the sun, his self-identity had a lot to do with destabilization and creating, chaos, for lack of a better word. But also with the sun is an asteroid called Gun. It's Gunn, but phonetic matches will work perfectly for any other purpose. It's a surname from someone. That's how it got its name, but it reflects weaponry. Opposing this sun, Gun, Chaos conjunction is Pholus, which we talked about briefly, as representing incidents where we see mass casualties from whatever cause. It could be an earthquake. The 2004 tsunami had Pholus prominent, et cetera, et cetera. But we see it all the time in charts of mass shootings. So that's opposing his sun, the predisposition there to cause major carnage. The crossbars of this are formed by Tantalus, which is another mythic asteroid. Tantalus is a mythic individual noted for the commission of heinous crimes, the most egregious of which was the murder and dismemberment of his own young son. With this is asteroid RIP, which again I use as a death indicator in the acronym RIP, and also asteroid Icarus, which indicates rash, reckless actions, heedless of the consequences. The final leg of the cross is composed of asteroid Salvador Aguirre as one word. So the Salvador preamble is his first name, and we can tell that it's, even though it's not his full name, we can just kind of chop off the surname there and forget about that for now. We know it's a valid referent for him because this point squares the sun, which is one of our rules for PNAs and charts. And with that is asteroid Requiem, which again is funeral mass for the dead. It refers to a memorable death or a memorable connection to death. And also asteroid Robbia, R-O-B-B-I-A. Now, that is the closest to the Robb Elementary School, R-O-B-B, which is where he committed his crimes. So there you've got the connection to death of children, you've got mass casualties, you've got shooting, you've got chaos, you've got himself and two death indicators and the venue in that Grand Cross. The stationary points in the chart are Lachesis, which is named for the mythic Greek fate who determines the span of life, and Osiris, which is named for the Greek god of the dead, Egyptian god of the dead.
Right.
So again, there's a strong emphasis in his psyche, a strong pull towards themes of death. There's also at station asteroid Geraldina. Now, the school was located at the corner of Old Korizo Road and Geraldine Street. And also asteroid Celian. Now, asteroid Celian I'm using as a reference for Celia. The first crime that he committed that day was the shooting in the face of his grandmother, Celia Gonzalez. So she was obviously a very pivotal influence in his life up to this point, which may have led to why he chose to begin his rampage with her. So those are the stationary points. But you can get really granular with this, and you can look at how other things are connecting. There is a conjunction of, so there's an opposition, I should say, from Jupiter, which represents fame and celebrity, to Uranus, which rules shootings. And with Uranus is asteroid Atropos, which is the mythic fate who actually severs the thread of life when Lachesis gives her the high sign and says, okay, it's time. And also asteroid Korizo, which I'm using for Korizo Road, Old Korizo Road. It's Korizo, it's one vowel different. So that says he sought fame, Jupiter, through a shooting, Uranus, a fatal shooting, Atropos, Uranus, on Old Korizo Road.
Would you say that the presence of two bodies named for two of the three fates gives a real strong flavor of hand of destiny in this? I don't mean just for him, just destiny.
Yeah, absolutely. We can also use karma for that. I use karma for destiny or fated circumstances, predetermined circumstances a lot. So let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, so that basic opposition is actually a T-square, and at the fulcrum points are Ixion, which again is that first murder in Greek myth, with asteroid Texas, which is the state, of course, where he committed his crimes.
My jaw is just slack.
Yeah.
Can I throw one other thing into this while you're going through your list?
Sure.
He was born during the last recurrence of the current Taurus-Scorpio eclipses. And the lunar, and his birthday, the Scorpio lunar eclipse, happened on May 16th when he turned 18, and then the next day he went out and bought his weapons.
Yeah.
So he got that lunar eclipse for his solar return.
Right, and that was a T-squaring. The eclipse was T-squaring that sun gun, okay? Mm-hmm. And it fell with the sun. I'm sorry, not T-squaring. It was sitting on Sun Gun and Pholus, okay, with the moon on Pholus. And then those crossbars, where that in square to the eclipse then were that Salvador Aguirre, Requiem Rabia, and the Rip Tantalus Icarus. So yeah, that whole Grand Cross was set off very strongly by that. His sun degree actually, was his sun degree was the sun degree of the lunar eclipse. Yes.
Right.
So he had a strong activation of that there.
So I interrupted you. You were going through your list and finding other nuggets.
Oh, yes. So we can actually look now at the time of the shooting, which I had to revise 4 times because they kept getting the information wrong. That was a tragic situation as well. But looks now like the entry to the school was at 11:33 a.m. on the 24th of May. At that time, Salvador Aguirre in Scorpio was exactly squaring the ascendant-descendant axis. Tantalus was on the midheaven.
Oh, my.
Let's see, what else we got here? Okay, we have a combination of asteroid Child with Osiris, so the death of children. And that is pretty broadly squared asteroid Gun, but also squared to the moon with Neptune, which again the moon refers to early childhood, Neptune is victims, and Mars, which is violent attacks, guns, and death. Violent death, I should say.
And for people who aren't like really big astrology buffs, the midheaven is the most public point in the chart.
Right.
So Tantalus being there would be like absolutely in the spotlight.
Right. And then there's a lot of other smaller things, like you got Korizo is traveling with Rip, which again is that death asteroid, and Gonzalez, which was his grandmother's name, and they are straddling his natal Apophis. Apophis is named for the ancient Egyptian personification of pure evil. And they're being opposed by Pluto in the sky and squared by Tantalus.
Can you go Apophis? How is that spelled?
Apophis.
That's one I'm going to start paying attention to.
Yeah, that's an Earth crosser too. We might get smashed by that someday.
Oh well, wouldn't that be strangely
not in our lifetimes, unless they're
appropriate?
are very far off, but it could be one of these days. Yeah, and then let's see if there's anything else here that's. Well, again, we have the Ixy and Pholus conjunction that's ongoing, and in this chart of the the shooting, it's squaring Jupiter, which is inflating the situation, and also in an out-of-sign square with that Mars, which is at 29 Pisces. By the way, that 29 Pisces degree for transit Mars is an exact match for his natal asteroid Gonzalez, his grandmother's surname, at the time that he shot her.
And 29 degrees Pisces is sometimes known as the degree of ultimate sorrow.
Well, that certainly fits here. And traveling with the sun that day was the other referent we can use for him in a P&A. There's an asteroid called Salvador Sanchez. That was traveling with the sun, as well as Mercury, which, of course, is children, primary education, and teachers.
Well, so anyone listening to this is just sitting there staring, I would imagine, at this point, and utterly fascinated. And you'd have this kind of analysis for a wide range of events and personalities, both political and, I would say, entertainment. Oriented,
sure.
all over your website. Are there any? So, are you tracking this particular story anymore? Like, are you considering adding other people into this saga?
Normally in an incident of this type, I will put the names in. Actually, I'm working on the Tulsa shooting right now, and I'm putting those names into the chart. I didn't do that in this instance. I did it for Sandy Hook, but that was a very difficult emotional slog for me, and I didn't do it here. However, I did put in the name of one of the teachers who was killed because her story in particular caught my attention. That was Irma Garcia. Her husband Joe died 2 days later of a heart attack, apparently brought on by extreme grief, and that was what really grabbed my attention. So I wanted to see how she fit into the chart in particular. And in fact, asteroid Irma, I also knew there were exact matches for both names, which is something I always like to focus on. Asteroid Irma that day was exactly conjunct asteroid Anubis, which is named for the Egyptian deity that governs funerary rites. And together they were exactly conjunct the shooter's natal Jupiter. So again, that sense of seeking fame or recognition. Within 5 degrees was asteroid Gun, which of course was the means he used to bring about her death. Let me just see if I can find where Garcia was by glancing at this chart. Garcia seems to be eluding me. Oh no, Garcia was at 29 Aries, along with right next to Tantalus at 27 Aries. So she was also on the midheaven as a focal point of the day.
I would be very curious to see how some of the political figures play in with this, particularly the head of the school police force, who then became the
Right.
city councilman and also the governor of the state. I would not be surprised if they're not woven into this web.
Yeah, well, I know for a fact there's an asteroid Abbott, so I'll have to plug that in sometime and see where it falls.
Wow. Well, all right. So everyone can see how rich, so much information can unfold from this, and there's a lot more at your site. I see that we're coming up towards the end of our time. I appreciate your generosity with your information, and thanks so much for being here. And tell people where they can find you.
It's Alex Asteroid Astrology, all one word. The www before and the .com after. So.
And you have a newsletter, so every time you have a new post, if someone signs up, they get information about 5 mythic asteroids, and then also they get, every time you have a new post, they'll get it in their email box, right? Is that how that works?
That's right. They'll get the basic bones of the incident in the email, and then they can go to the article for the details if they wish.
All right. And this is there any regularity to the schedule, or it's when something happens?
No, it's just as things happen, or I get the inspiration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm totally on board with that. Well, I thank you so very much. I have all kinds of stuff now that I'm going to be thinking about. And everyone, you can find I'm at empowermentunlimited.net and also on Om Times all over the astrological section. Everyone, be safe. Talk to you again soon.